It's June 1972 in the middle of the unforgiving, sun-baked Pacific Ocean. We're a few hundred miles south of Fiji, staring at one of the most hotly contested pieces of real estate on the planet. Welcome to the Republic of Minerva. Population, 0. Well, 0 if you don't count the incredibly confused sea turtles. But today, this soggy utopia is under attack. Approaching this glorious new nation is King Taufa'ahau IV of Tonga. And he hasn't just brought his army to conquer this new country, he's brought a goddamn brass band to play his theme music while he does it. The men standing on that wet pile of sand are about to realize that building your own country is a lot harder than simply ignoring your tax returns. Welcome back to Audacious History. I'm your host, and today we're talking about hubris. Specifically, the kind of hubris that only comes when you have millions of dollars and a burning, passionate hatred for the Internal Revenue Service. To understand the sheer, unadulterated audacity of the Republic of Minerva, you have to understand the man who dreamed it up, Michael Oliver. Oliver wasn't born into American wealth. He was born Moses Olitsky in Lithuania in 1928. His early life was marked by an unimaginable tragedy. When the shadow of the Holocaust swept across Eastern Europe, his family was caught in the terror. Oliver endured the horrors of a concentration camp, a brutalizing experience that left an indelible mark on his psyche. He survived, but the experience instilled in him a deep, unshakable distrust of centralized government. To him, the state wasn't a protector, it was a lethal threat. After the war, Oliver immigrated to the United States. He arrived penniless but possessed an incredible drive. He changed his name, moved to Nevada, and threw himself into real estate. And it turned out he was damn good at it. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Oliver amassed a massive fortune developing properties in the American Southwest. But as his bank accounts grew, so did his tax bills. And Michael Oliver despised paying taxes. For him, government regulations, zoning laws, and the IRS weren't just annoyances, they were the first steps on a slippery slope back to the horrors he had escaped. He became deeply entrenched in libertarian philosophy, devouring the works of Ayn Rand and Austrian economics. He believed that capitalism was the only moral economic system and that any form of taxation was literal theft. In 1968, he literally wrote the book on it, publishing a manifesto titled A New Constitution for a New Country. But Oliver wasn't just a keyboard warrior. He was a billionaire with a vision. He founded the Phoenix Foundation, a highly funded organization dedicated to one wildly ambitious goal, finding a piece of unclaimed territory and starting a brand new country from scratch. There would be no taxes, no welfare programs, no subsidies, no state police, just pure, unadulterated free market capitalism. There was just one tiny nagging problem. By the late 1970s, every single habitable piece of land on Earth was already claimed by someone else. You couldn't just walk into a forest and plant a flag anymore without a very angry government sending people with guns to tell you to leave. So, what do you do when all the land is taken? If you're Michael Oliver, you look at the map, you look at the ocean, and you say, "Fuck it, I'll build my own." The search for a new homeland led Oliver's surveyors to a treacherous stretch of water about 260 miles southwest of the Kingdom of Tonga and 400 miles south of Fiji. This was the Minerva Reefs. To call it an island would be an insult to islands. It was a pair of submerged coral atolls. At high tide, the entire reef was completely underwater. For centuries, it was known only as a graveyard for unfortunate ships that ripped their hulls on the jagged coral. It was desolate, dangerous, and absolutely perfect. Because the reefs were underwater at high tide, international law at the time didn't recognize them as land. Therefore, no country claimed them. They were a geopolitical loophole. Oliver's plan was brilliantly unhinged. He would haul massive amounts of sand to the reef, pile it up until it stayed above water during high tide, and then formally claim the newly crafted artificial island for his libertarian utopia. In 1971, the Phoenix Foundation put their money where their mouth was. They chartered a fleet of Australian dredging barges and sailed them out to the middle of nowhere. The logistical nightmare was staggering. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars hauling sand from the deep ocean floor and unceremoniously dumping it onto the coral. I cannot overstate how hard it is to build an island out of loose sand in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The ocean is undefeated. Every time a storm rolled in, huge chunks of Oliver's expensive new country would just wash away. It was literally throwing money into the ocean. But finally, after months of dumping dirt on a rock, they managed to keep a small, soggy perimeter above the high tide line. On January 19, 1972, the Republic of Minerva declared its independence. They raised a flag, a white torch of liberty on a blue background. They elected a president, a man named Morris C. Davis, who previously engineered parts of the project. They even minted their own currency, the Minerva coin, struck in pure silver and gold, because obviously fiat currency is for peasants. Oliver started heavily marketing his new republic. He took out ads in newspapers offering to sell plots of land in a planned floating city called Sea City that would accommodate 30,000 residents. He promised an absolute paradise for wealthy investors. No income tax, no corporate tax, zero government regulation. It was meant to be the ultimate safe haven for the world's elite to park their money and live free from the oppressive yoke of the state. It seemed like they had actually done it. They beat the system. But here's the thing about planting a flag in your own front yard and declaring independence. Eventually, your neighbors are going to look out the window, see what you're doing, and ask, "What the hell is going on over there?" And hey, if you're liking this story, throw me a like. Almost immediately after Oliver sent letters of recognition to the nations of the world, panic set in across the South Pacific. Australia and New Zealand were horrified. The idea of an unregulated, tax-free rogue state popping up in their backyard, a place that could become a haven for smugglers, money launderers, and unregulated casinos, was a nightmare. But no one was more insulted than the Kingdom of Tonga. Enter King Taufa'ahau IV. The King of Tonga was not a man to be trifled with. Physically, he was imposing, standing well over 6 feet tall and weighing over 300 pounds. Geopolitically, he was a fiercely proud monarch of the only Pacific nation to never fully lose its indigenous governance to Western colonization. So, when a bunch of wealthy white Americans showed up, dumped some sand on a reef historically used by Tongan fishermen, and declared it a sovereign nation, the king didn't see a libertarian experiment. He saw a bunch of arrogant colonizers trying to steal Tongan territory. The king was livid, and he wasn't going to write a polite letter to the United Nations about it. On June 15, 1972, King Taufa'ahau IV issued a royal proclamation. He officially declared that the Minerva Reefs had always been a traditional fishing ground for the Tongan people and that they were formally annexing the territory. Now, Michael Oliver and President Morris C. Davis were technically in the right according to a very strict, pedantic reading of 1970s international maritime law. The reef was technically outside Tonga's territorial waters. But law doesn't really matter when you're a bunch of guys in suits in Nevada, and the guy who wants your island is an absolute behemoth of a monarch with a standing army and a navy. Tonga called a conference of neighboring Pacific nations. Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, and Nauru all happily nodded along and said, "Yeah, give it to Tonga. Squash these libertarian nerds." With the backing of his neighbors, the king decided it was time to evict the Minervians. But he wasn't just going to send a polite eviction notice. He wanted a spectacle. He wanted to crush this fake country with so much overwhelming style that no one would ever dare pull a stunt like this in Tongan waters again. June 21st, 1972. The Tongan Expeditionary Force sets sail. This was not a stealth mission. King Taupo IV boarded the royal yacht accompanied by a detachment of the Tongan Defense Services, heavily armed and looking sharp in their uniforms. But the king also brought along something no modern military invasion should be without: the Tongan Police Brass Band. Because if you're going to conquer a pile of wet dirt, you need a soundtrack. As the Alobaha approached the reef, the tension was entirely one-sided. On the island of Minerva, there were a few individuals, representatives of the Phoenix Foundation, some hired hands, and a surveyor or two, sitting on a damp pile of sand surrounded by miles of endless ocean, watching a massive warship bearing down on them. Picture this standoff. You are a guy hired by a millionaire in Nevada to babysit a sandbar. You've been living on canned beans and dreaming of the day they build the luxury casino. Suddenly, you look to the horizon. There is a warship, and as it gets closer, you realize they are blaring a rousing march. You are being invaded by a marching band. It is peak geopolitical comedy. The Tongan forces disembarked onto the artificial island. Their boots immediately sank into the wet, unstable sand that Oliver had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars dredging. It was a tense few minutes. The Minervan representatives were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. The king, watching from the yacht, gave the signal. Without a single shot fired, without a drop of blood spilled, the Republic of Minerva fell. The Tongan troops hauled down the Minervan flag. They didn't even fold it nicely, they just tossed it aside. Then, in a moment of pure cinematic triumph, the brass band struck up the Tongan national anthem. The tubas roared, the trumpets blared over the crash of the ocean waves, and the Tongan flag was hoisted high into the Pacific sky. To add insult to injury, the king had brought along a labor force of Tongan convicts. Under the watchful eye of the military, the convicts immediately began building 2 small refuge stations on the reef to solidify Tonga's physical claim to the land, officially turning Oliver's libertarian utopia into a Tongan royal outpost. The Minervan representatives were politely told to get the hell off the sandbar. They picked up their things, got into their boats, and sailed away in absolute humiliation. The shortest-lived, strangest republic in the world was dead. And Michael Oliver? He had to sit in his comfortable office in Nevada and watch, powerless, as his multi-million-dollar dream was stolen by a guy with a tuba section. He fired his president, Morris C. Davis, in a fit of rage, wrote furiously worded letters to international courts, and screamed about property rights. But no international body cared. Tonga had the island, and the libertarian utopia was officially closed for business. But the universe has a funny sense of irony. Even the mighty King of Tonga couldn't defeat the Pacific Ocean. Over the next few years, fierce tropical storms and relentless tides battered the Minerva reefs. Without constant, incredibly expensive dredging to maintain it, the artificial sand islands were completely washed away. Today, at high tide, the Republic of Minerva is exactly what it was before Michael Oliver ever looked at a map: a dangerous, hidden coral reef resting quietly beneath the surface of the sea. Nature, it turns out, is the ultimate tax collector. It always gets its due. Michael Oliver didn't give up right away. He later tried to back a secessionist movement in the Bahamas on Abaco Island, and then tried to fund another rebellion in the island nation of Vanuatu. Both attempts failed miserably. He died in 2014, a very wealthy man, but a man who never managed to build his perfect country. The Republic of Minerva remains a testament to a very specific kind of 20th century hubris. It's a story of what happens when immense wealth meets an absolute refusal to participate in the social contract. You can buy the sand, you can mint the coins, and you can draw a flag, but you can't buy an army, and you certainly can't outmuscle a Polynesian king with a killer horn section. Thanks for joining on Audacious History. Before you click away, I've got a question for you to answer in the comments below. If you had unlimited billions and absolutely had to build your own rogue nation from scratch, where on earth would you try to put it? Until next time, stay audacious.